Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Anna Jackson, and I'm a naturopath. And I'm joined by Diane Miller, who is an attorney, and she is the Director of Law, and not the Director of Law and Public Policy for National Health Freedom and National Health. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to do that again. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Anna Jackson, and I am a naturopathic doctor. And I am joined by Diane Miller, who is an attorney and the Director of Law and Public Policy for both the National Health Freedom Coalition and the National Health Freedom Action. And today we are going to talk about different laws that naturopaths and other alternative health practitioners can use in their practice so that they can practice the medicine they want and be safe doing it. So I'm so excited to have Diane here. And Diane, thank you so much for, dedicating some of your time to this very important subject for us.
You're welcome. I'm glad to help, and thank you for having me.
Great. So we can kind of get started, and is that okay if I ask questions here and there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
That'd be great if you ask questions.
Okay.
So I think that to begin with this morning, I'd like to say that we're going to focus on the health freedom landscape for naturopaths, as well as a lot of other complementary and alternative healthcare practitioners that do not have conventional medical license. So I'll try and give you the context of some of the work that our organization does to establish safe harbor practitioner exemption laws in the many states. And so that's basically trying to educate you on that landscape legally and answer any questions you might have.
Great.
So thanks for having me. So one of the things that's important for all of us to understand, but especially practitioners with businesses, is that it really matters what the law says, and not to just assume that the laws let everybody do whatever they want. So I always encourage people to read the actual law and also the administrative codes around that law in order to understand the landscape that they are working in. I think Americans really do need to see the actual language of laws and understand that they can draft laws and pass laws that reflect what they want. That's the beauty of our country, that people can pass laws. In terms of activism, the states are responsible for keeping the people of that state safe in their domestic environments. And generally speaking, the federal government is involved with commerce going across state lines back and forth. The federal government has other jurisdiction within the states, but each state is responsible for the safety of their people, and that is why all the states are responsible for licensing professions that they feel pose a risk of harm to the public. So we're going to be focusing on state issues for the first part of this, so that you understand the licensing laws of professions. The many professions in the United States are not licensed because in our country, we believe that anyone should be able to follow their vocation and really practice their profession as they wish, and not to have to get permission from a government to practice a profession. So you can paint houses, and you can, mow lawns, and you can do a lot of things. But when it comes to healthcare, there are some professions that the state has decided that they need to restrict the general public from doing some certain things, such as surgery and giving out prescription drugs. So if there's something that poses an imminent risk of harm to the public, then the state says, well, only these particular people can do that act, just for the safety of the people. But a lot of those people in those health professions do a mixture of things that may be posing risk and things that don't pose risk at all. And so that's where the touchstone comes in terms of the politics of licensing. So, for example, in the state of Washington, there was a homeopath that was investigated, and they were investigated for practicing medicine without a license. They were also investigated for practicing naturopathic medicine without a license. And, you know, a person would say, well, how you know, what were they doing wrong? They weren't practicing medicine. They didn't have a white coat on. They didn't tell people they were a doctor. So you always have to look at the language of the law to see what is the definition of the practice of medicine. Why would a homeopath be investigated? So the definition of the practice of medicine in the state of Washington, one of the paragraphs is anyone who offers or undertakes to diagnose, cure, advise, or prescribe for any human disease, ailment, and injury, infirmity, deformity, pain, or other condition, physical or mental, real or imaginary, by any means or instrumentalities. So it doesn't have anything to do with license. It just has to do with, are you helping a person who believes that they have a health condition? And so if you're helping them in any manner, you could be charged with practicing medicine. And that's a very broad statute. So a person giving chicken soup to somebody could be charged under this statute that does not have a medical license. So there was a group of homeopaths wishing to set up a healing center in Maine, and someone said, you better not do that because you'll be charged with practicing medicine without a license. So that's why they went forward to get the safe harbor exemption. In Maine, the definition of the practice of medicine is very similar to Washington, and it's almost identical in every state if you'll read the laws in every state. The practice of medicine in Maine is describing, relieving in any degree, or curing, or professing, or attempting to diagnose, relieve, or cure a human disease, etc. So we want this definition of medicine to be very broad when you're licensing medical doctors, because we want them to do whatever they deem necessary to help their patients. So they want, they want to be able to do all of these things. On the other hand, we don't want to shut down other people. So there's an exemption list in many states saying, well, we really didn't mean that, for example, an exemption in Massachusetts is, we really didn't mean for clairvoyants to be charged with practicing medicine. In some states, we really didn't mean persons healing with spiritual means to be charged criminally for practicing medicine. In Iowa, there's an exemption for people giving spring water from their farms so that they couldn't be charged with practicing medicine. So this is an example of an exemption to the Class E crime in Maine. Nothing in this chapter may be construed to affect or prevent the practice of religious tenets of a church in the ministration to the sick or suffering by mental or spiritual means. So that's just an exemption. So when you read the laws in your state where you're practicing, you also have to read the exemptions to see if you're exempt. And the laws that I've been supporting passing are exemption laws. We want to leave the practice of medicine definition in place, but we want to have exemptions for people who are not hurting people.
And Diane, for the exemptions, do they usually state like herbalists or homeopaths or homeopathy, or is it much broader?
I will give you an example of that as we go forward.
Great.
So the new bill in Maine was LD 364 by Senator Miramont, and the new bill in Maine passed just last 2 weeks ago. So in Maine, it now says the current law will be a person who provides complementary or alternative healthcare services in accordance with this chapter, but who is not licensed, does not violate any law relating to licensing of healthcare professionals under this title, long as the person complies with the requirements of the chapter. So the requirements of the chapter is different in every state, depending on the group that passed the law. So, for example, some states like Minnesota has a section in it that lays out an example of all of the practitioners that might be exempt under this bill. And then it says, these are the prohibited acts that it's a list of 27 prohibited acts in Minnesota that you cannot do if you're not licensed. You can't give out prescription drugs. You can't call yourself a doctor. You can't have sex with your client. There's 27 prohibited acts. And in Minnesota also, there's 18 paragraphs of notifications that you have to give to your client that you're not licensed. So, but in California, there's, I think, 6 paragraphs of prohibited acts and 1 paragraph of disclosures. So it depends on the group going forward how they develop the laws and what the exemptions are. So for Maine, you'll need to read the actual law to see what that safe harbor looks like. What are the parameters that you stay inside of? So in Wisconsin right now, they are wishing to protect herbalists, homeopaths, and traditional naturopaths that are not licensed. And so they're wondering what the practice of medicine is. And here's the definition of the practice of medicine in Wisconsin. Very similar to the other states. 4 paragraphs of, and so first of all, when people want to practice in a state, they should read the practice of medicine statutes and the other practice acts for other professions to see if they were within their jurisdiction, and then they should read the exemption list and see if they have a safe harbor bill. The same goes with Massachusetts right now. They have introduced 2 bills in Massachusetts for safe harbor protection. The definition of Massachusetts law is to encourage the reliance of another person upon an individual's knowledge or skill in the maintenance of human health. So these are very broad laws that have criminal charges attached to them. So the exemptions in Massachusetts, 2 of the standing exemptions in Massachusetts right now are domestic administration of family remedies and clairvoyance or persons practicing hypnotism, magnetic healing, mind cure, massage, Christian Scientists. So it is different in every state depending on the culture. And I think that people think the United States is just one big federal country, but the states are so unique and so powerful. They create their own cultures. They have their own opinions about things, and they're very, very different. As I travel around the United States, I've been in like 30 or 35 of the state capitals. Each state is extremely unique, and their laws are unique too to their culture.
Yeah, and it seems so far that the practice of medicine is a state issue more than a federal one. The states make up their own definition and their bullet points of what you have to follow. It seems It's more of a state's issue.
Yes.
Okay.
So the states are responsible for licensing professions, and many states have put paragraphs in their licensing acts saying that they have reciprocity with other states who have licensed professionals. So if you're a doctor in Massachusetts, you might be able to practice in another state as long as you abide by the Massachusetts, reciprocity issues. But for the unlicensed people, they don't have that statute of reciprocity. So, they don't have the right to practice yet in most states. So here's the 2 bills that are moving now in Massachusetts. We're looking for support for those 2 bills, 3660 and 665. So this is an example of how the beginning of the interface between naturopathic medicine and medical naturopathic doctors and physicians and the traditional unlicensed naturopath. The reason that I became involved in this particular issue of intersection was because I was supporting the work of traditional naturopaths and licensed naturopathic doctors. And in Minnesota 20 years ago, there was a naturopathic medicine bill that went forward that would have made it a criminal act to practice traditional naturopathy without a license. The naturopathic doctors wished to have licensure and practice as physicians so that they could do the things that they were trained to do in their medical school. But when they put in their bill, it said it would be a criminal charge if you practice naturopathic medicine, and the definition of practice of naturopathic medicine was very broad, like the definition of practice of medicine in general. So we defeated their bill, and that created a firestorm, a really hurt feelings between a lot of beautiful colleagues that were friends originally and working together, because the medical naturopaths, we had defeated their bill, and we wanted to create a solution where everyone could practice. So this is an example in the state of Maryland a few years ago, is a similar bill that came forward. There was no health freedom group there, so it actually passed. So it's now illegal to practice traditional naturopathy in the state of Maryland, because when they passed their bill, they defined naturopathic medicine very, very broadly, as you see on the screen, which would include a lot of complementary and alternative practices, because it's a broad definition. And then it made it a felony to practice if you did not have a naturopathic medicine license. An individual may not practice, attempt to practice, or offer to practice naturopathic medicine. And when you see a statute like that, you have to go back and look at what is the definition of naturopathic medicine. I don't want to be charged criminally. You go back and you see the definition of naturopathic medicine is the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of human health conditions, injuries, and diseases using only patient education and naturopathic therapies and therapeutic substances recognized by the Council of Naturopathic Medical Education. So it puts a bind on the traditional naturopaths that are not licensed.
And it puts a bind on herbalists and homeopaths, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah. If you don't have a naturopathic medicine license in Maryland now, you are very vulnerable to charges of naturopathic medicine as well as practice of medicine in general. For example, in the state of Washington, on the first slide that I showed you, there was a homeopath. They were investigated for medicine, and they were also investigated for naturopathic medicine, because the state of Washington also has a bill like Maryland state law that does not have an exemption in it for traditional naturopaths or herbalists.
Okay, so
But if you have a license, or you have reciprocity for a license for naturopathic medicine in Maryland or Washington, then you can do all of these things under your licensed, so your license includes homeopathy and herbalism and everything that you learned in your school that is recognized by the Council of Naturopathic Medical Education.
Mm-hmm.
So you would be under the jurisdiction of your board. If you're licensed, you're under the jurisdiction of your board, and then that board can discipline you for going outside of your standard of care as a professional. So if you're specializing in homeopathy or herbalism or something, but you're a naturopathic medical doctor and you are licensed in that state, which I think 14 states have licensing for naturopathic medical doctors.
I think it's more. I think it's like 20 something.
Oh, is it 20 now? Okay, great. I haven't looked through, but I know that they're passing passing laws, then if you are licensed or have reciprocity for licensure, you would be practicing under your board.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
And a lot of these, like a homeopath that is not licensed under any other board, like the majority of homeopaths are not licensed. They're classical, or they're regular homeopaths that are professional homeopaths. And they're colleagues of many of the doctors in the culture, and they're teaching them because their whole focus is homeopathy. So they're the greatest teachers, and we want to make sure that they can practice as homeopaths without a medical license, because that's all they do is homeopathy, which is not dangerous. So here's an example of the power of the healing politics. In the state of Kansas, they actually have a law that says, recognizing that the practice of the healing arts is a privilege granted by legislative authority and is not a natural right of individuals. And we don't believe that. We think this is, in our organization, we think this is a very terrible law. We think that the healing of people is an art of the human race, and the only time that it should be restricted or licensed is if you're doing something that is dangerous, inherently dangerous. So the safe harbor bills have passed in these states. Oklahoma and Idaho have historically had some freedom laws, and Arizona is limited to just unlicensed homeopaths, but otherwise these other states have now health freedom safe harbor practitioner laws for unlicensed people. You asked earlier what the language would look like. Some states list the things that they want to include in their law, and some states don't. For example, New Mexico lists anthroposophy, aromatherapy, Ayurveda, cultural traditional healing practices, including curanderos, sobaderos, partera, medica. I don't even know the next one. But so they decided to put a list so that the legislators would know what they were talking about: detoxification practices, energetic healing, herbalism, homeopathy, non-invasive instrumentalities. So the Nevada Wellness Services, in Nevada, they have, if you're not a licensed homeopath medical doctor in Nevada, you may not practice homeopathy there. So they have not put homeopathy in their list in the Nevada Safe Harbor bill, but they have put a lot of other things in there.
It seems like energetic healing.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like homeopathy to me.
Yes, and you will be able to argue that, but homeopathy in Nevada is licensed and restricted.
So you have to be a licensed homeopath in Nevada.
Yes. So you have to be a medical doctor first. And you can work as a unlicensed homeopath under a medical doctor if you're certified under that medical doctor. So they have very strict laws about homeopathy. There are 3 states that have years ago, half of the doctors were medical homeopaths. So the medical doctors, there were 17 homeopathic medical colleges in the United States. They're now all closed. So medical doctors could either choose to go to an allopathic school or a homeopathic school. That's how prevalent homeopathy was. So there are 3 states left in the United States that have medical doctors who specialize in homeopathy. And they are Connecticut, Arizona, and Nevada. So you cannot practice homeopathy there. They consider it a medical doctor's territory. And they have their own medical doctor statutes. So what our organization does is we help people pass safe harbor exemption laws and review licensing laws that are going forward that might infringe on the freedom for everyone to practice. So we have supported safe harbor exemption laws in many states that are going forward. We have conference calls with leaders. We travel to states. We do presentations and workshops in states. We testify at hearings. We've drafted or helped draft most of the safe harbor legislation that has passed, or at least been in on it. So that's our work. When we review a licensing statute, we want to make sure that it has an exemption in it for the unlicensed practitioners. So for example, in Minnesota, the naturopathic doctors are registered here in Minnesota, but we also have Minnesota 146A, which is an exemption statute. And so if you're practicing under Minnesota 146A safe harbor, you are exempt from criminal charges under the naturopathic medicine licensing statute. So the naturopathic, whenever we see a naturopathic licensing bill go forward, we review it to make sure it has an exemption for traditional naturopaths and herbalists and homeopaths. And if it doesn't, or if it tries to make the use of the term naturopath, if it tries to take the term naturopath out of the public domain, we will oppose that bill. So it's been a great conversation to educate people about how to craft the laws so that everyone can practice, and so that they're not competing with each other legally or causing hard feelings among practitioners. There are many traditional naturopaths and traditional herbalists and homeopaths that practice many things that the naturopathic physicians practice, but don't go beyond into the allopathic activities of giving out prescription drugs or diagnosing diseases or things like that. So we want to make sure that everybody can do what they are trained to do. So here is my own little handmade map of the safe harbor bills that are now, we're going to have to make Maine green because it has now passed. So this is our state where if you're green, you have a safe harbor exemption bill. If you're blue, you have introduced a bill at some time in the last 15 years. If you're pink, you're considering it. And if you're white, we don't have a group there that we are in touch with on a daily basis. So, and the ones that we've been working on most recently, the state of Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And we also went to Iowa. Iowa introduced a bill this year, so I have to update this map. So here's some of the activists that worked in Maine on the safe harbor at the Capitol. Here's Massachusetts, the people that are working on the safe harbor legislation in Massachusetts. Here's an example of what a lobby day looks like at a Capitol on vaccines in Minnesota. Here's when you try and pass bills, sometimes you hire a lobbyist, and the woman on the left was the lobbyist, and the gentleman on the right is the oldest herbalist in Nevada. He just passed recently, but he was responsible for really marshaling the protection of herbalists in Nevada.
Right. And so Diane, when we say safe harbor laws, that is really broad to any, what did you call it? We have the practice of medicine law exemptions. So safe harbor laws, we're talking about exemptions to the practice of medicine law in each state.
Yes, and some of the safe harbor states not only decide to exempt from the practice of medicine, but they also exempt from the practice of naturopathic medicine, the practice of chiropractic, the practice of acupuncture. So they make their exemption broad for all practice acts.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, for example, in New Mexico, this is a practice act that is, all of these things are exempt from any of the practice acts. In Minnesota, it's just the Medical Practice Act, the Naturopathic Practice Act, and I think we did counseling. We've done them one by one.
Okay. Okay.
So Nevada is just the practice, I believe, of medicine. You have to check on that. But you can exempt out of any practice act that you want when you're drafting your bill. So the bill going forward in Maine was all practice acts, in Massachusetts, all practice acts, I believe. I'd have to check on that, but that's a very good question. So in the states that have naturopathic licensing, it's important to look at the naturopathic licensing statute to see if your colleagues would be exempt from your naturopathic license statute in that state so that you could practice freely with them.
Yeah, colleagues, homeopaths, herbalists, other.
Right.
And then for like acupuncture and Chinese practitioners,
Yes.
how do they play a role? Are they allowed to practice other modalities?
Yes.
I guess you'd have to read their statute.
Exactly. You have to read their statute.
Okay.
Almost every state has a licensing statute for acupuncture.
Okay.
But many of those definitions of acupuncture include Chinese herbs, Chinese medicine, I mean, even one of them added complementary and alternative health care, and it didn't have an exemption for traditional, so we had to look into that.
Okay.
So whenever you have a statute that is saying, here's the definition of what we do, and if you do it without a license, it's a criminal act.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to go, if, say, for example, if acupuncture added Chinese herbs to their act, and their act did not have an exemption for traditional herbalist, that herbalist could be charged with practicing acupuncture without a license, even if they weren't using needles, if it was in that definition. So we always have to, that's why when we pass a safe harbor exemption statute, it's best to exempt out of all the practice acts so that there's never that confusion.
And do you find that in states where naturopaths are trying to pass licensing laws, are they willing to open that up more, that dialogue?
I've had one state was willing, but no, generally not. Generally, their understanding of the language of the law, they would oftentimes say, this law does not put you out of practice, this law doesn't hurt your practice, although that's not what the language says. So they're more talking on policy issues. They have no intention of shutting down anybody else. They just want to get licensed. But when we propose the amendment, that's usually rejected. So we're working really hard to educate them on the legal language that's required. One of the there's two sticky points in that, what I call a turf war. The term naturopath is used by traditional unlicensed naturopaths practicing under safe harbor, and it's used by medical naturopathic doctors. And when I see the term naturopath being taken out of the public domain and given exclusively to one group, that would be a reason why we would oppose that bill. And so the term naturopath is something we will work to protect. We will also work to protect the practice of naturopathy. So for example, if the if they did not have an exemption in their bill that said that there's an exemption for traditional naturopaths to practice naturopathy, we would oppose that bill, because we think that the exemptions in the naturopathic doctor bills should protect the traditional naturopaths, their colleagues. So sometimes they put exemptions in for homeopathy and herbalists, but they won't put an exemption in for a traditional naturopath. So they there's still tension there that they're not willing to acknowledge their colleagues' traditional naturopaths. And then the other thing is that the use of the term doctor, our organization does not work to protect the term doctor. So in other words, if it said, if there was a naturopathic licensing bill that said that the term naturopathic doctor was illegal for a traditional naturopath to use, we would not oppose that, because we don't want to be in the fight about who uses the word doctor and who doesn't use the word doctor. Many states have laws about who can use the word doctor, if you're licensed or if you're a PhD or what it's attached to. And we don't want to be we're not invested in making sure that people can use the word doctor. We just are invested in making sure that people can use terms like naturopath, herbalist, homeopath. So
okay, that makes sense. And I think that is a nice distinction I think that, I like the fact that we can, as long as we're not hurting someone, that traditional naturopaths or homeopaths or herbalists should have the right to practice their medicine. And I'm actually kind of learning a lot. I didn't realize that naturopathic, the naturopathic doctor laws are completely closing that off for traditional naturopaths. I didn't realize that. And I don't really like that, that's happening. But the term naturopath and the naturopathic doctor, I think, is a good distinction. And then it is up to the naturopath or the naturopathic doctor to educate their patient or the public as to what that distinction is, so the public knows.
The term naturopath is such an old term.
Yeah.
Many herbalists are traditional naturopaths. They don't just stick to herbalism. They do a lot of other things. Traditional naturopaths are very prominent. And so when I talk at herbalist conferences, many of them are traditional naturopaths because they use nutrition, they use all kinds of other things.
Yeah.
But the medical naturopathic doctors, another caveat here is that there is an organization and a group of traditional naturopaths that want to use the term doctor. And so because they have a history of using the term doctor before licensing came into play for naturopathy in the 70s, they've always been called doctors. Just like many years ago, herbalists used to say, hey, I'm going to my herbalist doctor. It's a cultural thing. And also there were schools, the Clayton School, many of these traditional naturopaths have doctor degrees from traditional naturopathic, historic, cultural schools that are not allopathic schools, but they always use the term doctor, and they had the diploma of naturopathic doctor, ND. So the organizations that are traditional naturopaths that wish to use the term doctor and ND are maybe you would say not happy with us for not taking a stand on the term doctor. So there's like three camps. There's the safe harbor people that just want to protect the practice of naturopathy and herbalism and homeopathy and the traditional words that describe that. Then there's the naturopathic doctors that are traditional naturopaths that have the historic diplomas and want to have the term ND and naturopathic doctor protected. And then there's the medical naturopaths that want the use of the term ND, naturopathic doctor, licensed naturopathic doctor, naturopathic physician, all of the other titles. They want exclusive use of all the titles. And so there's this kind of gradient of who gets involved in the political fights generated at capitals regarding these bills.
Okay.
So our organization does not take a stand on the use of the term doctor, but we are very strong about the use of the term naturopathy. So just a little bit about some of the other issues that do you have any other further questions about?
No, I think that all made sense. It was really good information.
Good.
Yeah.
So our organization, we work on, I gave you a small list of some of the things we work on. Practitioner rights, vaccine exemption rights. We really believe that parents should have the right to decide the vaccines that children should get instead of the state. GMO labeling, geoengineering, electromagnetic frequencies, glyphosate, Roundup, regenerative projects. So we are very involved in many, supporting many groups with different issues. And I guess just to make a comment on federal issues, some of the federal issues going on these, we get involved with by giving comments into the FDA or the CDC or whatever federal agency is happening. So for homeopathic remedies, the commerce issues for federal law are the product and manufacturing of homeopathic remedies. Recently, there's been a draft guidance that's going to restrict homeopathic remedies from being sold and marketed, and we've put in our comments opposing that. We have not supported the petition that wants the status quo to be put in place. We would rather draft new language for homeopathic remedies. So we have a draft of federal law draft that we're recommending for changing the law for homeopathic remedies. So these are all a list of different ways the federal issues get involved. We get involved on so many levels. And then just for your information, I want to point out that the definition of the drug federally is very similar to the definition of medicine on a state level. So any product that you use, if it's an article intended for the use in a diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals, that is a drug legally. It could be water. It could be anything. If you use it to cure somebody or prevention of a disease, it becomes a drug and you cannot use it. So making claims that you're helping someone with a substance is a federal crime unless you have a drug, investigative new drug certificate. I don't know if you are familiar with the Dietary Supplement Act of 1994, but that is the law that makes dietary supplements, herbs, amino acids, all kinds of foods and supplements not under the definition of drugs. So in Part C here of the definition of drugs, you'll see that this green part, other than food, that was the amendment that was put into federal law in 1994 that protected food from being considered drug. But it only protects it in Part C, intended to affect the structure or function of the body. So we did not get the amendment into Part B, intended for cure, mitigation, or treatment of disease. So if you are saying you can treat somebody in a disease, it's still a drug. But if you're just saying that it has a structure function impact on your body, then it's okay and it's not a drug. So here's the definition of food, dietary supplement that we came up with in 1994. A vitamin, a mineral, an herb or other botanical, an amino acid, a dietary substance. So these are all considered foods, generally regarded as safe. Does not include homeopathic remedies. Homeopathic remedies are still within the definition of drug in the first paragraph. So
Diane,
sure, go ahead.
I'm sorry, that kind of contradicts. So the FDA says that homeopathy is a drug, and so you have to, by the FDA standards, you have to have a license in order to prescribe drugs to practice homeopathy, whereas most homeopaths on the state level aren't licensed, and so they don't have. Do you see what I mean? Doesn't that contradict?
Yes, so it's a drug in the homeopathic pharmacopoeia. But in the safe harbor bills, what we've done with that is we've put that an unlicensed person, a prohibited act for an unlicensed person is to give out a prescription drug.
So you've defined it as a prescription drug.
Right.
Okay.
And a unlicensed person can give out a homeopathic over-the-counter drug.
Okay. Okay.
Good question, though. You're tracking this very closely, Anna. Good student.
Thank you. Yeah, it's all fascinating. It's the world of law is so important. And as I'm now creating my own practice, I understand how important it is to know what the law is, because that governs everything. You know, and that slight definition can make all the difference.
It can. Right. Laws. That's what our country's built on, laws, and hopefully people will abide by the laws and make the laws look like what they want them to look like. So foods are generally regarded as safe unless proven otherwise. The Dietary Supplement Act, we put in a paragraph that says the government of the burden of proof of harm is on the government on dietary supplements. And anything marketed before 1994 is considered a dietary supplement. There's some issues going on now with the laws of new dietary ingredients, and that's a complex question. So I guess at the end of all of my presentations, I ask who is representing you. You know, who is out there making laws, giving input on the healing laws, on the movement of holistic healthcare, and I always encourage people to be involved, such as yourself, in learning about it. That's just a remarkable gift that you're learning about the laws in the holistic health field. So I call for new leaders who understand health freedom, who want health freedom, who teach health freedom, and who live health freedom. Our organization, National Health Freedom Coalition, the 501c3 educational organization, has started the United States Health Freedom Congress. We host it, and we're not hosting it this year, but almost every year we've had one. And we're bringing together these different organizations that have an interest, because many organizations are working so hard on their issue, like the GMO issue or the 5G issue or the practitioner issues or the vaccine issues, and they don't have opportunities to be with their other colleagues, and also they don't understand the interface between all the issues, that they're all health freedom issues. Sometimes a vaccine person will be, anti-vaccine, but they won't know anything about alternative health, So it's so we've brought all these organizations together. We have voting members in the Health Freedom Congress. And when I was at the International Herb Symposium recently, I reminded them that United Plant Savers and American Herbalists Guild are both voting members of the United States Health Freedom Congress. We pass resolutions, they're all on the website for the United States Health Freedom Congress. And here's our most recent one, 2018, health freedom leaders across the country that came to the Health Freedom Congress. So, and then on our website, we have nationalhealthfreedom.org. We have the principles of health freedom, which have been adopted by the United States Health Freedom Congress. And I will leave that with you when I leave you this PowerPoint. The fundamental right of self-determination of individuals to be let alone to survive on their own terms and in their own manner is number one. And so there's 8 principles of health freedom. And then the last principle is the duty of the government to protect health freedom and to make no law or public policy abridging health freedom or its fundamental principles, so that the people themselves can dictate how they want to survive on the planet. And this is my last thing I like to say to people is laws and customs must be carefully reviewed, revised, and even repealed if necessary, and new laws created to reflect the development, the evolution, and the spiritual maturization of a people.
That's great.
So thank you so much. It's great to be here with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diane. If somebody, and there's the Health Freedom Coalition and then the Action Team, are they under the same URL? Like if somebody wants to learn more and get involved, or are they 2 separate organizations?
They are 2 separate organizations, but they're sister organizations. And the URL for the coalition is nationalhealthfreedom.org.
Okay.
And the URL for the action organization is nationalhealthfreedomaction.org.
Okay.
And so we do have this year, we have a new website, and I can certainly show that to you if you want me to bring it up.
Yeah.
We've, just linked it to Facebook and Twitter and everything. So it's a wonderful tool. And we have all of if you're interested in passing a bill in your state, we have all the advocacy documents on the website that you can see. So this is the National Coalition website.
Okay.
And it has the principles of health freedom. And when you go to the advocacy, it has a resource center. These are a list of all the laws that have been passed for safe harbor. Mm-hmm. And we list all of them and the language of all the laws. And on this site, there's also a little link to the NHFA action site. So here's the action site. And the action site, we have action alerts going out on all the different states that are going forward. So if you click on the action alerts, you'll see all of the different actions that are going on in the many states. Mm-hmm. And so the other thing on this site is that there's an advocacy portal and there's a state organization portal. So for the state organization portal on the action site, there's a United States map, and you can just click on your state and see what the, what's going on in that state that we know of. And if there's nothing going on in that state and there's no group, we'll help start one, or we'll, work with you to start one. So.
Okay, great. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. That's really, really good information.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Oh, I hope you are helped by this information, and if you have any further questions, feel free to contact me, or I can be directly contacted at my email similars@aol.com.
Similars@aol.com.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Diane.
All right.